Well, we've seen the films. The Odessa File and the Quiller Memorandum are just two of several feature films dramatising secret SS cults surviving long after World War II. So how real are those films? We examine two compelling and supposedly factual accounts detailing a Nazi financial empire very much alive in the post-war world. And we go to Argentina tonight. We start this evening with Laurence de Mello from Argentina. Hi, Laurence, and welcome to Drive Time.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tony.
Sorry that the music's a little bit loud for you there. Laurence, can you just introduce yourself and explain what you're up to over there in Buenos Aires?
Well, I've been here, Tony, since 2002. When I came over I had a change of lifestyle. I came here, and I was already an investigative journalist and television producer. And the more I met people and socialised, of course, the Nazis became a topic. So I couldn't resist but investigate what the presence actually was today, because it's still a very sort of normal affair to talk about Nazis next door. So.
Okay, well, for many people, they don't necessarily make the connection between Argentina and the Nazis, but it has actually quite a large German population, doesn't it?
Well, it's not just that, Tony. There was an open-door policy of immigration to Argentina for the last 200 years. And, of course, Perón wanted to capitalise on the technology of Germany towards the end of the Second World War. So, of course, he was going to take anybody that was willing to come and wanted to make deals with them. So I think that's quite common knowledge.
Can you tell us a bit about the Perón regime, then?
Perón, okay, he was a dictatorship, of course, as you know, and his wife was Eva. But not only that, it wasn't just at the end of the war that Perón had connections with Nazi Germany, although they were neutral, as you probably know, Argentina. But in 1943, Perón actually went to Germany to discuss an arms deal, weapons deals, technology, etc. So he was already quite interested in what was going on with technology and Nazis, even before they knew that they were going to lose the war.
Now, one of the ways I came across you was through your connection to John Ainsworth Davis, who goes under also a pseudonym of Christopher Crichton. Tell us a little bit about who he was and what his role was at the end of World War II.
Well, Christopher Crichton is a pseudonym for John Ainsworth Davis, and he was actually an operative in World War II, and he was groomed and headhunted by Desmond Morton and Churchill, and in fact he grew up on the Chartwell estate with Churchill as a young boy. We have found documentary evidence that in fact Morton was his godfather, and he was taken in because people forget today, we look at our 16-year-olds today and they can't even make a sandwich, but during the war we had chaps flying Spitfires at 16 and 17 years of age, so it wasn't unusual to take such young people to go into operations. So he was groomed, he was taken in, he was working for special operations, and one of his colleagues was actually, his superior was Ian Fleming, who was actually a commander with the intelligence services, Royal Navy. So he took on this name, Christopher Crichton, as a pseudonym in the 80s, and he collaborated with some work. It was very, very difficult, because remember you've got the Official Secrets Act, but at the same time he wanted to get his story out. In 1979, he did a co-authorship with Brian Garfield for a book called The Paladin. Now, The Paladin was printed as fiction. Now, it's quite curious. So this book comes out, and it's The Paladin. And if you check it out, The Paladin, Brian Garfield, you'll see on the front cover, you see this young boy with Churchill in the background overshadowing him. And basically, it covers the story of John Ainsworth Davis' life growing up under the shadow of Churchill, with his godfather being taken from Ampleforth School by Desmond Morton, and then groomed and put into operations. Now, when this book was published, Brian Garfield, if anybody knows, is the one and the same author of The Death Wish, okay, Death Wish film, Charles Bronson. So he's a big Hollywood novelist and screenwriter. Why would he bring in Christopher Crichton? Now, Christopher Crichton came in, gave him the information, they did this book, and then in 1989, Crichton did another co-authorship with a chap called Noel Hind, who did the Khrushchev Objective. Again, this does not cover his growing up with Churchill, etc. What it does cover is the Crabbe affair. I don't know if anybody remembers Buster Crabbe, who was the British naval diver.
Yeah, but the principle here being that if they were to write a historical non-fiction book account of events, that they could easily be imprisoned under the Official Secrets Act. So the idea really was to write these stories as fictional novels.
Now, the sad thing is, Crichton, then he went on to 96 and he published OPJB, Operation James Bond. So the three books really need to be looked at to analyse, you see the whole picture. Now, when this book came out, of course, people enjoyed it. Juicy, covers everything. It mainly focuses on Operation James Bond, which was the operation to remove Martin Bormann from Berlin.
Now, you already mentioned Ian Fleming, because, of course, he went on to write the James Bond books. So can you explain why it was called Operation James Bond?
I have had access. Now, the thing is, of course, as journalists, we have to go and check it out, Tony, as we know. But I've had access to some brilliant documentation because Christopher Crichton was passed off as a charlatan. And, in fact, Rupert Allison, who writes as Nigel West, I was in touch with him about a year or 18 months ago, and I asked him about Christopher Crichton. He said, no, total charlatan. I was paid by a patron to investigate him, which was Schumann, which was a big critic for the West End, an important critic, and basically he poo-pooed him. Now, in the press, everybody said, wonderful book, Operation James Bond, but this guy's invented it. Now, you have to start standing back and saying, first of all, Garfield and Noel Hind are extremely prolific writers. And why would they bring somebody in? They don't need somebody else's ideas. So, as you were saying, it's a way to get the information out without breaching the Official Secrets Act. Now, Operation James Bond comes across as being this amazing story. That was published in the UK, 1996, by Simon & Schuster, and it was also published in France and Germany. It was a bestseller in France and Germany. It was never published in the United States of America. I came into contact with Christopher Crichton, John Ainsworth Davis, in 2006 because I was investigating Bormann. So, okay, let's check out if we can get hold of John Ainsworth Davis and see if his information that I have of Bormann here in Argentina match up. We started to communicate, and then he dropped some documents to me saying that he needed to get these things published offshore in secret. And this manuscript was actually a fill-in on everything that really happened, but it also included documentation from Louis Mountbatten, Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was the first Sea Lord, as you know, who commissioned John Ainsworth Davis to tell the truth 25 years after his death and that of Churchill. So that's where we are now. Now, everybody can say, well, maybe it's not true. Crichton has a wonderful fantasy. He's invented this. But having said that, you have to start looking at the big picture in that. Last year, in 2012, Christopher Crichton was invited to a commemoration service, Lady Patricia Mountbatten. Now, Lady Patricia Mountbatten is the Countess Mountbatten of Burma, the daughter of Mountbatten, and she's fully aware of the OPJB book. Now, in OPJB, it mentions Mountbatten's instructions, everything that Mountbatten asked to do. And remember, within OPJB, we bomb, Crichton bombs an Allied submarine, which is the Dutch, to prevent the intelligence being returned that Pearl Harbor was at threat. The assassination of British service people because they knew that there was information being snuffled. So Crichton went in and had to do these hits on his own people. So surely Lady Patricia is not going to be seen in a photograph, let alone have anything to do with somebody that wrote so much about her father.
No, that's right. One of the most interesting aspects of this, Laurence, is your ability to double-check what John Ainsworth Davis, Christopher Crichton, is actually saying over there in Argentina. So what have you found about Bormann? Because there's still a lot saying that Bormann died right at the end of the war and he never survived the war.
No, he was definitely here. And this is how I got in touch with Crichton, because I'd already been researching this for about 5 years when I finally got in touch with Crichton, because I thought, let's just check up with his side of the story, etc. And it took me a long time to get hold of him. No. Absolutely convinced. I interviewed, very, very fortunately, apart from certain other VIPs here, the ADC to Peron. And this gentleman was formerly the head of the Federal Police of Argentina, highly decorated military man, decorated by Charles de Gaulle, decorated by Hirohito, bona fide VIP internationally on the military circuit. And he was the man that was responsible for dismantling the narcotic trade in the 90s here in South America. Now, I was fortunate to be introduced to him. He was 95 when I met him, and we started to talk about things, and he wanted me to look after his memoirs, and we started to talk about Nazis, etc., and of course Bormann came out. And he finally agreed after 3 years that he would testify on tape for me that he met Bormann in Buenos Aires in 1950, at the end of 1952, 1953, And of course, you forget at the time, people say, oh, well, why didn't he say anything? At the time, it was just another person. It's like you meeting Ed Balls in 30 years. Maybe Ed Balls becomes some weird sort of person. So at the time, it wasn't a big deal to have Martin Bormann in Buenos Aires, and this gentleman would have to escort him around because he was part of the national security. But also, Martin Bormann was certainly installed in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Buenos Aires, which was owned by Germans, throughout 1953. I lose track of Bormann in Argentina around the time of the Eichmann kidnapping, when Mossad came over, well, actually just a bit before, and also Mengele also does a bunk then, because they were all here. Mengele, Eichmann, Aribert Heim, Karl Vernet. Karl Vernet is here as well. Karl Vernet was the chap, one of the doctors, equally to Mengele, that he was in Auschwitz, and he's the one that created the pink triangle, putting triangles on homosexuals, and he implanted monkeys' testicles, etc. Now, Mengele and Vernet, when they came to Argentina, were actually given licenses to practice as doctors under the Ministry of Argentine Health. So these chaps, when they were here, they weren't hiding, although Bormann was, because Bormann was wanted. Why was he wanted? Because he had access to all the bank accounts and all the gold that had been recovered by Nazi Germany.
OK, so I suppose the $64,000 question, Laurence, is what happened to all that loot? I mean, we know that much of it was laundered through the Sullivan and Cromwell's law firm in New York through something like a decade or more. But where is that money now? Do we know?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew where it was. But the thing is, I haven't focused too much on everyone says follow the money. I've been following the most important thing is to prove that Martin Bormann got out.
Yeah.
And Martin Bormann got out with the protection of UCUSA. Not so much the USA, but mainly Britain. Churchill wanted him out. They wanted control. And remember, at the end of the day, I mean, they picked up all the Nazi scientists that supposedly inventing gas chambers, but you think they're not going to pick up the money guy? Remember, Martin Bormann was not in the camp putting pistols to people's heads. He was actually Hitler's handler, and he was managing the money, he was out managing the movements, he was managing the investment into other nations before World War II even started. So of course they're going to go get the man with the money.
OK, Laurence, just finally, can you just recommend maybe TV documentaries or anything that people might be able to have a look at to find out more about this?
It's very difficult, because the thing is, I find, well, that's what I'm planning to do, but not just a documentary. Now with John Ainsworth Davies, finally he realises it's time, he's got to come out. But documentaries are pretty tough because, you know, everything's edited, and you have to remember the media is controlled by those that do not want the information to come out. But
why do you say that? What evidence have you got for that?
Well, you know yourself with Paul Manning's book, when he tried to get his book out, and in fact you alerted me to the fact that they murdered his son. Now, the media is controlled because the media is controlled by big money people, banks, etc. And of course they have to, well, when you talk about, I don't want to say New World Order, but you know better than me that on that score, Tony, because you've been working on it for many, many years. So you know there is a group of people that control everything, and they only permit what should come out, what shouldn't come out. Let me give you a very quick example. The Simon Wiesenthal Centre, which as we know was set up by Simon Wiesenthal, and their brief was to catch Nazis. I contacted the head of the Simon Wiesenthal Centre 4 years ago, and his name is Dr. Efrain Zurev, and he was the one that orchestrated the last chance operation. I contacted him for access to the Bormann file because I told him I have somebody who I believe is Bormann's daughter, born in 1953. And if he really was interested, he would say, yeah, okay, Laurence, here's the file, here's the DNA, tell me what you've got. First of all, he blocked me for 3 months, and when I spoke to him finally, I said, you know, why are you blocking me? Like, I've got this. Can you help me? He said, I don't buy it. I said, I'm not asking you to buy it, Dr. Sewell. I'm just asking you to help me have access to the file that Wiesenthal Centre hold on Martin Bormann. Been absolutely refused. So the thing is, if even the Simon Wiesenthal Centre are blocking journalists and people accessing information, you've got to start asking questions. Why?
Laurence de Mello from Buenos Aires, thanks ever so much for joining us on Drive Time this evening. Fascinating. And old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers is with us too. Martin, can you put what Laurence has been saying there into context? Because it sounds like Laurence has actually literally met people who were with Bormann in South America. So the idea of him actually dying at the end of World War II, as some would have us believe, seems to be out the window.
Yeah, well, Paul Manning pretty much convinced me. His book pretty much convinced me, and he was a war correspondent throughout World War II who knew all the principles involved, including Churchill. I think but for a British audience we need to get through people's heads is it wasn't just Perron who was being nice to the Nazis. Our own intelligence service were being very nice to them, and of course that's the root of an awful lot of problems in the modern world.
What about this Manning book? She mentioned OPJB there by Christopher Crichton. They do seem to sort of fit together. They're both talking about Bormann. One is looking at the way in which Bormann was got out of Nazi Germany in 1945 from under the noses of the Russians and got over to Argentina at that point. What then happened to all this money?
Well, it was basically invested in Latin America and then reinvested in the Federal Republic of West Germany with British and American support. I think what people have got to realise is it's been on the record for a very long time. If people do a search on the internet for Operation Paperclip, large numbers of Nazis were A, helped to escape, and B, just absorbed into the Western security apparatus. The whole Gladio structure in Western Europe was often staffed by ex-Nazis. And Reinhard Gehlen, who used to head up the Eastern Front Gestapo, just ends up as head of the West German intelligence services at the end of the war. I mean, it's absolutely straightforward. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, was escaped to Argentina and then employed by the CIA to train the Bolivian armed forces in torture techniques. So this linkage, and of course you mentioned Sullivan and Cromwell there, which was basically Alan Dulles' law firm, and he was the founder of the CIA, and they were the ones who were laundering the Nazi money. Now this stuff is actually well known, and people should understand it. Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, was arrested during World War II for working for the enemy. Though you didn't hear that much, you don't hear that much on Fox News, do you? But it's a fact, and the fact is that big money talks. It talked in the 1940s, and it still talks today.
PCFM.